Great. All right. My colleague Kate was hopefully to be present to give a little summary of who we are at EJA. Yes, I can see Kate here, so I'll pass to Kate for a summary of who we are. Thanks, Kate.
Hi everyone. So my name is Kate Ellingham. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO at Economic Justice Australia. Just hopefully a lot of you are familiar with EJA, but we are the peak organisation for 23 community legal centres across Australia that provide specialist advice to people about social security. And our membership has been doing this for the last 40 years. We have very much our work is based on the casework and expertise of our member centres. And I think that a strength of this report and of EJ's work is that expertise and the fact that we're very much solutions focused, and a lot of that comes from the analysis and evidence that we get from our membership experience and casework. We EJA is, I think, in a really good position at the moment where we are working very closely with government and relevant ministers to achieve the objective, which is a more equitable and accessible social security system. I would just like to acknowledge, I think there are quite a few staff from DSS and Services Australia on the call today. And I just wanted to thank them for Services Australia in particular, who have gone over each one aspect of this report and really fact-checked it for us. I think that adds to the integrity of the report. And I would also like to thank the Snow Foundation, who I think is also hopefully on this webinar, because without their generous funding, we wouldn't have been able to do this in the way that we have. I think that the breadth of this report is really significant. I don't think that this has been done, and I think, sorry, I missed the introduction. Some Zoom issue, so I'm repeating myself or what Taylor has said, but this is one of 3 reports, and there's really the amount of work that has gone into this and the recommendations that have been really carefully considered are significant. I think that in terms of moving forward, there are obviously dozens and dozens of recommendations, and so this will be the platform for a lot of EJ's work in the coming months and years. And we will go through a process, hopefully with a lot of you as well, to really pull out and identify what the key priorities are in terms of the recommendations. And so I really encourage everybody else to do the same, to really use this report as a resource in terms of advocacy moving forward. And something that EJ will be doing is proactively reaching out to stakeholders. I think it's very important that we are aligned in terms of what we're asking for and what priorities we're seeing. Obviously, social security is a complex beast. And I think that in terms of getting really strategic or really systemic, broad systemic reform, it's really important that we are aligned in terms of what our priorities are and what we're asking for. So this is the beginning of, I think, a lot of work moving forward. But hand back to you, Taylor.
Thank you, Kate. No, you didn't miss any introduction, so perfect. I will just flag my colleague Sally is intending to co-present this presentation with me. So if Sally's not able to join by the time we get to her section, I will rejig the structure very slightly, but I hope the content will remain the same. It'll just be a slightly different structure. Okay. So I want to introduce you to the project first and step you through how we did this research before we move you into the findings, the impacts and the recommendations, so we can set the scene. So of course, this month we've released the second report in our 3-part series, as Kate's mentioned, Social Security for Women Outside of Our Cities. And I'm frankly really delighted to be here to share the findings of this report together with us today. This second report, it builds on the first, which was focused on access to services and service delivery. And today we're going to be looking at something equally as critical, in my view, which is key limitations in current legislation and policy that we believe are undermining effective social security support for women in our regional, rural, remote, and very remote areas, which we will refer to as 4R Australia, just for ease of speaking, because it's a mouthful. So throughout this report, we've framed the experiences of women and the community workers who support them around concepts that are integral to the social security system, essentially the way the social security system in our country is set up. So we look first as women as parents and as guardians. We look at women experiencing a disability and or a chronic illness, women who are carers, women who are underemployed or unemployed, and then young women in navigating the social security system. So, what emerges really clearly from the stories that we've been told through this research is that there are unequivocally barriers created by geographic location and distance from metropolitan centres, which are barriers that can actively prevent people, women's particularly, accessing their social security entitlements. We also see there's a really highly gendered nature of caring responsibilities for women in 4R areas for both children and for people with a disability or ill health. We see the prevalence and really devastating consequences of family and domestic violence in our 4R areas. And we also see the significant, really weight of responsibility of women who carry household administration and really the family's financial security. And this is really apparent through the conversations that we have. So as we move through today's session, I want to first highlight two issues that underscore like essentially the whole report and what much of what you'll hear in this webinar. So firstly, there's an urgent need to raise the age of working age payments. Straight up, no messing around. Um, Job Seeker, Youth Allowance, and Oz Study have simply failed to keep pace with the cost of living, especially in 4R areas and especially to do with housing. Youth allowance is woefully inadequate. We also need immediate increases to Commonwealth rent assistance and remote area allowance. Remote area allowance has stayed the same for 20 years. It's not indexed, and at the moment it's about $8 a week. So, in my experience, not enough to buy a bag of powdered milk in some 4R locations. Secondly, and another point that underpins this whole conversation today, is that the social security system, in our view, has become too complicated for those who need to access it, but also those we suggest who are administering it. You'll hear us explain that through the context of each different category in which the social security system is categorized. So briefly, we framed this project with participants, trying to give participants the opportunity to tell us what they thought were the biggest issues for women in 4R areas. And we had three broad research questions. The first focused is on structural barriers, the second on impacts, and finally on reform, and creating a pathway to change these structural barriers. As we walk through this report and our other reports in this series, it's really important to note that these issues, of course, specifically and disproportionately apply to 4R women in this has come through in this research, but we also see these issues applying for women in the cities and also people of all different genders. So we see these issues impacting large swathes of our community, and but disproportionately women in 4R areas when you combine them with the access and service delivery issues which we've outlined in report 1. So at its core, this research project and EJA's work in general is underpinned by the expertise and decades of experience of our member centres at Specialist Social Security Legal Services. The day in, day out, these members see the impact of social security law, policy, and service delivery on women in 4R areas, as well as other cohorts of our population. Throughout this project, we combined semi-structured interviews with social security lawyers from our member centres and community service providers. We analysed data we received from Services Australia, the Department of Social Services, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and we also undertook a literature review and legal analysis of Social Security law, policy, and case law. We have an advisory group that supports this project, which is made up of experts in really diverse fields relating to Social Security issues. And these experts provided guidance and feedback, and we're really grateful for their time and support. We also partnered with 2 universities for this project to undertake discrete research projects that underpins this broader project. The University of Melbourne's Executive Branch Research Lab and the University of Queensland's Pro Bono Centre provided really invaluable assistance, and we thank them greatly as well. So through this project, we spoke with 160 workers from 96 different organisations. They included, of course, our member centres, specialist Social Security lawyers, but we also spoke to other generalist and other different specialised legal services, community health organisations, Aboriginal community controlled organisations, health services, financial counselling services, family violence services, and the list goes on. We really prioritised getting the mix right, as we've written on the screen. We prioritised a geographic spread across state and territory jurisdictions, but also a spread across regional, rural, remote, and very remote areas. And we focused on getting diversity and expertise of people's specialisations and the practice areas they were working in. To be frank, at the beginning of this project, we didn't set out with the intention of speaking to so many people, but the overwhelming desire for reform and action that came through in the conversations we had, and people's referral of their communities and their networks to speak to us, and the real strength and advocacy of people we spoke to was really impossible to exclude. So this report, of course, is the second report in a 3-part series. Our first report, which we released in April, focuses on access issues, so face-to-face servicing, digital servicing, access to appeals, and the like. Today, we're talking about report 2, which focuses on the structural issues caused by legislation and policy and how they're impacting different cohorts of women. Our third report focuses on the cross-cutting issues that affect different cohorts of women. So we look forward to releasing that in due course. So this report is broken down into 5 different chapters, and you'll notice it's essentially the way the Social Security system is set up as well. So we hope it acts almost as a handbook for reform. So because my colleague Sally was hoping to be here to speak about parents and guardians, and I'm sure you're all excitedly awaiting for that discussion, I'm going to skip forward just to the topic of women with a disability and hope that Sally is able to join shortly. So it'll happen, but it'll just happen in a different order. Great. Okay. So women with disabilities and or chronic illness. So people told us a lot about women experiencing disabilities and chronic illness in 4R areas. I'm going to open with this quote, which I think sets the scene for the conversation. It's from a service provider in New South Wales. So, it is not uncommon for our clients to have struggled with the system for many years, sometimes upwards of a decade. They have lodged multiple unsuccessful applications, have limited to no understanding about why they were unsuccessful, have doctors and others telling them they should be on DSP, but it's not until they have had a conversation with a caseworker at our centre that they actually understand what is needed for a successful application, what was missing from their previous applications, and wherever there's any hope for them in an appeal or a new application. Centrelink has never taken the time to explain what was wrong or missing or needed, or when they do try and explain it, it is in standard Centrelink terms with no reframing and explaining to make sure our client understands. So when we spoke to people about this, people told us at its core that the disability support pension criteria and claim processes were too complex. At its most basic, the claim form has 144 questions and written in what one service provider called the language of Centrelink. We heard from people that many women didn't understand what they needed to prove and what evidence they needed to provide. We heard from our member centres that they explained their extensive year-long efforts to upskill their communities around DSP criteria and processes was because of the overwhelming demand from their communities. Services Australia's rejection letters, information provided by frontline staff at Services Australia, and other public facing resources were, in their view, simply just not cutting it. And people in their communities were suffering and living in poverty. We heard that women desperately needed more assistance to claim and gather documents, but we heard that Services Australia staff were taking exclusively a hands-off approach. Community workers from domestic violence services, Aboriginal community controlled services, and even some housing services were telling us that they would spend hours with their clients trying to complete even the first step of a disability support pension claim form, despite it not being their role and them receiving zero funding to provide that service. One worker said to me, and I'll quote, "I don't think I've ever seen Centrelink actively help someone get onto the DSP," end quote. We heard even when women manage to submit their claim, we heard that they can face really, in their view, agonizing wait times. One woman's application we heard about sat with a subject matter expert for 12 months with nothing happening. Her condition during that time deteriorated absolutely, like completely, and her medical evidence had then become outdated. She had to start the expensive, exhausting, and long process of gathering all that medical evidence all over again. We also heard from service providers that there's shockingly little effort to identify people who should be on the disability support pension already existing within the social security system. We heard that, for example, when a mother loses parenting payment because her child ages out, she's simply told to claim job seeker, despite Services Australia in this case having substantial evidence of her medical conditions and disability on file. One worker noted to us, and I quote again, "There's no such sort of thing with Centrelink going, well, okay, I can see here that you got such and such payment and you have this medical issue, so maybe I should talk to you about a disability support pension claim." On this note, I want to tell you about Colleen. Colleen is obviously not her real name. We've changed her name and some identifying features to protect her privacy. But Colleen is in her 60s, and Colleen has lived her entire life in a very remote Aboriginal community. As a child, Colleen got polio, and as a result, she's got significant permanent physical disabilities. Despite being visibly and functionally unable to work and living in a community with extremely limited employment opportunities, Colleen hasn't been able to access the disability support pension. She lives in a community with no health services. The point in which I've been told this story is when Colleen had experienced a really severe incident of family violence and she wasn't safe. So, a women's group from the local land council travels on an outreach circuit to Colleen's community um, and has come to town and offered to take Colleen to a different community to safety to live with other family. The community that Colleen was to be moved to was a 12-hour journey on unsealed roads without phone or internet. And Colleen has said, "I don't want to leave." And perhaps you've got ideas for why Colleen doesn't want to leave bubbling in your head. But the primary reason Colleen was told this women's group she didn't want to leave is because she was due to report to Centrelink the next day via phone and was fearful of having her job seeker payments cancelled or suspended. So Colleen was so reluctant to leave, despite the real imminent serious risk of family violence towards her, that she would only leave after she'd made that call to Centrelink, to Services Australia. The women's group spent 6 hours on the phone to Services Australia trying to allow Colleen to report a day early, only for them to continuously be told, we can't do that. You have to call tomorrow. You have to call tomorrow. Just call us from the road. The women's group has obviously done a great job at advocating on Colleen's behalf, that there's been no phone connection on this journey, and finally been able to allow her to report a day early. And it was only after that did Colleen agree to travel. Colleen remains on job seeker payment. So, like Colleen, in different circumstances, there are many women who have chronic illness or multiple conditions who are stuck on job seeker, living on $257 less a fortnight than the disability support pension provides, without the pensioner concession card, and still having to comply with, in my view and the view of the people we spoke to, inappropriate mutual obligation requirements. So we heard that the disability support pension rules don't fit the reality of life outside our cities. The impairment tables ask, can you use public transport? Can you drive for 30 minutes? We heard from one service provider that it would take their client 20 minutes to drive to their letterbox. And in their view, the impairment tables were woefully inappropriate for this woman's situation. In the view of the people we spoke to, the system is designed for metropolitan contexts and fails to account for people living in 4R areas. The barrier we heard most about relating to the disability support pension was that medical services were limited, very far away, and unaffordable. Many women have no access to GPs. Others have locum doctors that rotate through every few months, which we heard provides no continuity of care, and the ability to gather medical evidence was limited to non-existent. Specialists in 4R areas are often completely unavailable. As one worker told me, and I quote, there are just no neuropsychs in this area at all. Another said that their only travelling specialist refuses to provide anything in support of DSP. When services do exist, we heard that the cost was prohibitive. Specialist reports can cost hundreds of dollars, and put simply, women on job seeker don't have the money to pay for that. There are provisions in our social security policy for remote areas that acknowledge that decisions about DSP need to be made on the basis of available evidence, but the communities workers we spoke to weren't aware that these provisions existed, didn't see them being applied, and it's really unclear whether Services Australia staff routinely apply them. Even when women can access doctors, we heard that the medical evidence that's being provided by these doctors weren't acceptable in terms of Services Australia's criteria. Services Australia has removed the treating doctor report form that guided documents through specific evidence needed, and service providers reported that doctors now freestyle reports in really time-pressured consultations that don't adequately support applications or claims for DSP. We also heard that because there's no Medicare item number for doctors to prepare and prepare DSP reports, doctors do this work unpaid or cram them into standard consultation times. Finally, the program of support. This is perhaps the most frustrating barrier that was reported to us throughout this project and is well documented in our members' experience assisting people with disability support pension related issues. This requirement applies to women who have multiple conditions and have points on numerous tables, impairment tables. So this program of support requirement requires 18 months of active participation in employment services. But women in situations who have chronic illness or disability are often too unwell to participate in this program. When they provide medical certificates to exempt them from these requirements, that time doesn't count as time served towards the program of support requirement. We hear from service providers that the view is that the only option for these women is to push through while sick, which often and can cause debilitating worsening of their conditions. As one caseworker put it, and I quote, they do mutual obligations for a month or two. They get a medical exemption for 3 months. After 18 months, they've only completed a few months. They're never healthy enough to complete a full 18 months. And I must note that there is employment services are able to exit women or people from program of support. However, we are seeing that employment services are either not aware of that or are not actively engaging in that option. This report recommends a complete abolition of program of support, and it's a key part of EJA's advocacy work. The program of support really traps people with debilitating disabilities and illnesses in this process that we see not helping their employment prospects. The instrument enabling program of support is sunsetting in April 2026, so very shortly. And EJ, we view this as our opportunity to have this harmful requirement removed, and we encourage other people in this space to support this move. Women that we're speaking about are chronically ill, they have a disability, and they have medical conditions. We're hearing of them struggling to survive on inadequate job seeker payments while being told to jump through hoops that they just cannot simply satisfy, especially in 4R areas. We view the system needing urgent reform, simplified criteria, better support to claim, faster processing, proactive identification of women within the social security system who should be directed towards supported claim process for the disability support pension, accessible assistance, gathering medical evidence, and the abolition of the program of support. I'm just checking if my colleague Sally is here. Fantastic, I can see her name.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear
Whew,
you.
that's great.
So what I might do, our plan was that Sally would speak about women as parents and guardians. So I might say if anyone has any questions related to women with disabilities or chronic illness or anything I've spoken about just now, pop it in the chat, but I will turn to Sally to speak about the intended first section as women as parents and guardians. And then once we've spoken about both those chapters, we'll come and answer any questions you have either in the chat or you can put your hand up and talk about it. All right, so on that, I'll move back to the start of our presentation to women as parents and guardians.
Thank you. Taylor, my apologies, everyone. It's been a scramble here. I've got IT issues, so I'm on my phone, but reading off a screen. Yeah, so just to start with parents and guardians, we might go to a quote. I'm going to use the term parents here as a shortcut, but, you know, I am obviously including other people, guardians, etc., with parenting responsibilities. So, yeah, we wanted to frame it up in terms of the burden that women carry in terms of this work, women as mothers. And this quote from Regional Tasmania, I think, says it all, that it's just the burden on women to receive their adequate payments. So they're having to provide the birth certificate with the name, they're having to prove that they're separated, they're having to prove that they didn't understand whatever the manner of things. And women are increasingly shouldering a heavy burden when it comes to the social security system. And I think that will become increasingly obvious as we move on. So parents and guardians, we've identified a number of issues. Firstly, there is the issue that the payments, there's numerous payments, different structures, different rates, different requirements, and it's just too complicated for many women to get their heads around. Every payment has a different eligibility requirements. There are confusing things like the separation of parenting payment, job seeker, and the family tax benefit. Those two systems are quite different. One uses fortnightly income, one uses annual income. Parenting payment cannot be split. Only one parent can get it, whereas family tax benefit can be split between separated parents. And the consequence of that is really that people cannot monitor the accuracy of their own payments and be sure that they're also getting everything that they are entitled to. We also heard about women in households where the male partners had completely disengaged from the system. They kind of had it with Centrelink, often around mutual obligations. And so that meant that it's either up to the mother to manage and try to get somehow his payments reinstated when really he's the one who has to put in the claim, etc., or the family surviving on one adult's payment. And we heard that people give up. They just think it's too hard. Maybe they're getting parenting payment or job seeker, but they feel like family tax benefits too hard, or vice versa. The next issue really is just that fear of the system. So for women who've had bad experiences and they feel like it was all beyond their control, they can be really loath to re-engage. It can be overwhelming. They perceive it as punishing, or they're scared of repercussions, and often they're things that are quite unfounded. So they're scared to query a decision, and it's because they haven't understood why something went wrong in the past. So someone might have a debt, they're repaying that, and then they don't want to claim the next payment because they're worried something will go wrong. Obviously people with mental health issues, but also just people who aren't good at navigating systems are particularly affected. The third issue, that separation of family tax benefit and income support leads to debts. So they're not only different eligibility and assessment, they're dealt with by different branches and through different IT systems. So it's extraordinary that at this point, 2025, the lack of internal IT integration means there's no checking between the two systems. So although there's data matching with tax, with immigration, etc., someone can go for years regularly accurately informing Services Australia of their fortnightly income. But if they haven't done a tax return and they haven't updated their family tax benefit income, they can be paid at the wrong rate. The issue there is the longer it goes on, the bigger the debts. And so, you know, community workers, EJA members see these debts that go in the tens or, you know, beyond $100,000. The next area where women really bear the brunt of the system is that people age out of payments because of the age of their children. The single parenting payment stops at age 14. Family tax benefit stops at 15 for kids who aren't at school, or it can go up to 19. And that results in a really significant reduction in the amount of money that people are entitled to, particularly if they have to move from parenting payment to job seeker, or if they just lose their family tax benefit. If a woman is trying to maintain a household with a certain number of bedrooms, etc., then that is dire for the family. Sometimes the young person can claim youth allowance, but the mother can't force the child to, or control where that money's spent. So yet again, she's, you know, wearing the consequences. The next point is it's kind of an age-old problem around women having to care for children and look for work. So, you know, until 2006, these payments didn't have that requirement, parenting payment, or before that, sole parenting pension. So that's kind of a new invention. And we know some women are able to manage that well, but for others, it's a nightmare, and particularly for women without resources. So they're trying to run a household and care for their children with very limited resources while they're looking for work. Those provisions really clearly undervalue caring work and the type of work involved in keeping a household running, despite rhetoric to the contrary from the government. And we would really like to see the attitude to parents through these payments more like the new Parents Pathways program, which is voluntary and framed around supporting parents. The reporting care of children, the next point, is a big one. Our members frequently see issues where a woman has struggled to ensure that Services Australia is always clearly notified within 14 days of arrangements where the couple have separated after having children. It's particularly stressful for women when there's ongoing abuse from their ex-partner. But even where separations are amicable, it's common for kids to move between houses. And, you know, as kids get older, as teenagers, they might spend more time here or there. And the system is not set up to accommodate that. On top of that, the system's weaponized. We know perpetrators ring Services Australia, make false reports, and that causes problems. And here it is vital that Services Australia do more to ensure that the person losing income is always contacted and information's verified. So we know that there are requirements to try to contact people, and we know Services Australia staff certainly make those attempts, but it is often not enough. So whether it requires 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 attempts, we need to ensure that the person usually the woman who's losing part of her payment or all of her payment, that there is a conversation with her to verify the facts. The next point, and this is a big one that really requires some thought, the system is not good at dealing with informal care arrangements, which particularly affect First Nations women around kinship care. So close friends, relatives, aunties, uncles, grandparents, etc. Care, ad hoc care by people other than the principal carer do not fit the Social Security definitions. It's really all or nothing. You're a principal carer or you're not. So I just want to really quickly refer to a quote that's in the report from one of the community service providers about a case that she had. So she talked about her client who the Services Australia person said to her, "How much do you care for the child?" And the client was saying back to them, "I have them sometimes, Arnie has them sometimes, then me sometimes, Arnie sometimes." And so the staff member then tries to fit it in the Services Australia criteria. So would you say you have it 80%, Arnie has 20%? Then the woman says, no, not like that. And then, so is it maybe 90%, 10? And eventually the staff member has to reach a conclusion. And basically the conclusion is wrong. And that's what the decision was based on. This worker then FOI'd the file and got the transcript of the phone call, which clearly established that what was recorded by the staff member is not what the parent was describing, and they appealed the decision. So yeah, just to reiterate the point that we heard very clearly from remote Australia that it's often not just mum and dad, it's other family are caring for the child. And it's certainly not that the child is abandoned, which is language thrown around in this space. It's that there's a period of time where other people are doing more care than the mother. But the mother is still caring for the child and thinking, well, I'm still caring, so cannot understand what the issue is. And also situations where the mother's getting the funds and handing them to the people doing most of the care, which again, the social security system doesn't accommodate and raises a debt. Okay, couple more quick things. This is an important one too. Loss of money when children go into care. The parents lose money and they are trying to work out how to maintain the household, improve the household, reunify with the child, which is completely undermined by the loss of income. The next one is significant issues with the child support and family tax benefit interface. I won't go into detail there, but I will let you know that just yesterday we've put up a new and in fact longer investigation into this area on our website. But just the importance of Services Australia, making sure that people really understand the system and aren't losing their family tax benefit because they don't understand or because perpetrators are manipulating the system. Yes, so that's the quick summary. Next slide, please, Taylor.
Thanks, Sally. I'm just going to give a time warning. We've got, if we moved on to the next topic now, we have about 6 minutes for each topic. So your call, how you want to divide the carer.
You? Yeah, so just to note that the idea that families are pooling resources really fails to notice what is going on in a lot of households where the mother has the burden. Next slide. And rhetoric around family tax benefit, which is, that's animated, yep, that you'll see there the first two lines. The government really talks about family tax benefit as being for families, but if you look down, you can see that is paid mostly to women. And then the last point on that slide, which is animated, is that, can you click that? Yep, if it's paid to the mother, it's her debt. So whether or not she spends it or has access to it, and at what point that a problem arises, she is the one that pays it back. All right, next slide. And yeah, so we do have a number of recommendations, and they revolve around these key points: simplifying the system, improving points of transition for parents when their children are aging them out of payments, stronger support for children in care and for the parents to reunify, and the work that needs to be done on the social security and child support interface. Yep. And then I think we're right for questions, if people have any questions.
Yep, absolutely. Everyone's welcome to ask them in the chat. Charmaine has just asked if we can share that child support investigation, Sally.
Yes, we'd absolutely love to. It's only just gone off in the last couple of days to the ministers, etc., department. So yes, that will be happening late this week. We'll be sending that to our allies.
Great. Please don't think this is the last opportunity to ask questions. We're just cautious of all your very busy schedules. So please ask them in the chat as we move on. But if there's nothing else, we'll move on to our next section of this presentation, which is women who are carers. So that's Sally, as you as well. Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So again, just framing it up through a quote. And that is this person, again, Tasmania, saying, I think there's a lot of people that would be in that gap where they've worked all their lives and suddenly they get into a situation and they don't know that they could be eligible for payments. It's that lack of awareness. Unless you go searching, you don't know. And I'm wondering if your medical practitioner knows that you're caring for your wife, are they going to tell you about social security payments? So yeah, that was the first finding we had, really, that many women aren't aware of their entitlements, whether it's because, they work, they have a child they're caring for, or maybe they've got an elderly spouse. People are not necessarily aware of carer allowance and carer payment, which are quite different payments. One's income support, one is a supplementary payment. And it's women who are shouldering, the burden of care. The next point is that navigating the claim process is still too difficult. So there are different forms that need to be filled out depending on whether a person is over 16 or under 16. The one for those under 16 really recognises that children become more able to care for themselves as they age. And even though they're relatively straightforward, they still require that the person being cared for has had, medical assistance, usually diagnosis, treatment, etc., and that there are costs involved with that. There's we all know that the significant issues of accessing healthcare, accessing medical experts in outside metropolitan areas. There's also the issue of doctors understanding their roles. So are they providing their evidence as the person describes to them or as they perceive it? Noting these forms are not about, symptoms. They're about how much care a person requires. The actual tools themselves undervalue supervisory care. So if person has a psychosocial condition or they're fluctuating or episodic, it's not necessarily as well captured as someone who physically needs assistance. So, for example, someone might need to be prompted to eat, to be reminded to go to the toilet, to, talked through the processes and having a shower, or particularly, if they're in danger of, if they're a suicide risk, or if, they get confused or they may have a fall, the forms are not as strong. There's also the peculiarity that psychologists are excluded from adult assessments. So although a person can, for example, a person may have been diagnosed, etc., and have been under the care of a psychologist as a child, but when they have to reclaim around turning 16, then their psychologist is no longer relevant to their claim. That's hard to understand and something we're currently talking with the department about. The definition of constant care is too restrictive. That particularly affects parents who are separated, including those providing care when the child's not, in theory, living with them on that day. And it means people have to track care carefully. For example, if someone's providing constant care, there's a case where the person's house was being not renovated, but changed to accommodate the caree, and the person was temporarily staying with other family. They had to provide evidence about exactly who was where and when. And it really doesn't work for First Nations people providing care to numerous people in different places. So they might be providing constant care, but not necessarily to the same person through the same time. Location of care is an issue. Carer payment says you must provide care in the home of the receiver. We can't understand the logic of that. The person isn't, in theory, required to live with the person, but they must be providing constant care in that home. So it doesn't work then if you want to take the person you're caring for while you're providing care to a person in another house some of the time. It doesn't work for people providing care for more than 2 people in 2 spots. And the last one's a very simple one. Recently, it was improved so that the formula says care provided for 100 hours over 4 weeks, which is about 25 hours a week. That is, in fact, less than school hours. And, you know, one of our members recently had a case where a person was knocked back because they were doing work while their child was at school, and that exceeded the time limit. So yes, next slide, please. We'll skip that one. And so here are our recommendations. Basically that we get more accessible information out to people about entitlement and claims so people know how to claim and what they're entitled to. Improving pathways for treating health professionals, particularly, you know, if a doctor would like to ring someone and ask a question of Services Australia staff about how a form should be filled out, they currently have to just wait on hold like everyone else. We develop assessment tools that recognise supervisory care, get psychologists onto the adult assessment forms, and also improve those definitions of constant care and location of care.
I suggest we keep moving on, but please continue to ask questions in the chat if anything comes up that's a burning question. So next will also be you. Oh, it will not be you, Sally. It'll be myself. Great. Fantastic. So young women. Let's talk about young women, what we heard about young women in 4R Australia. So I want to start with this. It's a quote from regional Queensland, and when I heard it, it really hit close to home. A service provider, regional Queensland, they run a youth homelessness service. So many of the young people in there couldn't get youth allowance because their parents earned too much money, according in their view, and because of that, they couldn't go on their Department of Housing list to be into transitional accommodation. So we heard from people overwhelmingly that youth payment rates are absolutely inadequate to cover basic living costs, particularly in 4R areas where young women and people in general are facing higher living expenses, right? To put that in contrast, the maximum rate of youth allowance for someone who's deemed independent, single, younger than 22, not living with parents and don't have kids is only $663.30 a fortnight, $47 a day. Job seeker payment is $56 a day and pensions are $75 a day. We heard people tell us that this is woefully inadequate, to put it frankly. We know that there are no affordable rentals nationwide for people receiving youth allowance, even when we're combining it with Commonwealth rental assistance. Look at Anglicaire's most recent rental snapshot, right? We had workers tell us, and I quote, everyone knows that the Centrelink amount isn't enough isn't even at the poverty line. And cost in rural and remote areas, things are more expensive. How do you get access to the same things as people in the city? Or like transport, we go really long distances, pay for petrol and pay for cars. End quote. I had another a person tell me, I quote, I have a client who can't take their dog to the vet because she just can't afford any vet bills. She's in crisis mode week to week. She's under financial stress every day. It's a really horrific way to live. Now, in addition to the rate of youth payments being woefully inadequate, we also heard that many young women are not used to dealing with government systems, and the social security system can be complex, of course. And we heard that young women find this overwhelming. As one service provider told me, and I quote, Centrelink forms and processes can be challenging for any person unfamiliar with the system, particularly a teenager who's never filled in applied for anything before. The complexity involved can be a significant deterrent and stressor for young women. There's an assumption within our social security system that a young person will remain financially dependent on their parents until age 22. This really fails to reflect the modern reality. We heard from people that young people aren't dependent until that age. They stop being dependent financially much earlier, or they're unable to depend on their parents at a much earlier age. We heard that for many young women and frontline service providers, they lack knowledge of the independence provisions within our youth payment system that may allow a young person to get the independent rate of payment before age 22. And we also heard that that lack of awareness extends to frontline staff within Services Australia as well. I had one advocate tell me, and I quote, it's not unusual for Centrelink customer service officers to lack knowledge of specific legal and policy provisions underpinning youth allowance, which leads to the dissemination of incorrect information, end quote. Another said that the independence provisions only work if vulnerable young people know they exist. Is it really reasonable to expect a young woman told she's ineligible by the person at Centrelink because she's under 22, she'll have the knowledge, resources, and experiences to persist? We also heard that parental means tests are having a significant impact on young people and their families in Australia, and it's creating genuine financial hardship for people that have never been impacted by this before. So young people can be considered independent under concessional workforce independence criteria if they've moved from, like we're talking about, these 4R areas to a city to study or undertake work, and they've worked since leaving school. But unlike other independence provision, there's a parental income test that applies for these young people. And a young person isn't eligible if their parents' combined income exceeds $160,000. That's two parents earning 81 grand each. So not wealthy by any means. Service providers describe the effect of these provisions on young people, observing that some young people in their communities just choose not to go to uni. Others really struggle to study at uni without support from the social security system. We had a worker tell us, I quote, for the first time, we're seeing an increase in requests from services from areas that would not ordinarily access our services due to being socioeconomically higher up the chain. This significantly affects parents' ability to support their children. So parental income tests apply without regard to like household costs. So maybe you own a pretty huge mortgage, you're supporting other adult children in the house, you're living in a 4R area where everything's a lot more expensive. And they're just being outpaced by the reality of living in 4R areas today. We also heard that unreasonable to live at home provisions, of course, they provide a pathway to independence, but we heard that the assessment process is complex, intrusive, and sometimes risky for young people. We heard that young people experiencing family violence from their parents were at risk of the parents being informed of the process occurring, and we heard of instances of that happening with detrimental impacts. We heard that young people were either remaining in abusive family homes because they didn't know that they could access these provisions or were scared of the assessment process, or they leave home without social security support and living in poverty.
Just a phone call, Taylor, till 5 minutes to go.
Great. Okay. The only other point I'll make in relation to youth payments is the really dire input we've had from service providers about the transition from out-of-home care and young women caught in that jurisdictional, in my view, gap between leaving state and territory care and not being able to access Commonwealth social security support. And it was really concerning. But on that point, I'll pass over to Sally for our final point.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to whiz through our content around people who are unemployed or underemployed, noting that's about 1 million people once you combine job seeker, parenting payment, and also youth allowance. So I just wanted to start first really by setting the context that we all know working age payments are too low. They're way lower than pensions. And basically people cannot afford to not only pay their essentials, it undermines their capacity to look for work and also to engage digitally, which is required these days to look for work and also engage with the system. So raising the rate continues to be one of our core asks. Mutual obligations are particularly punishing for people in areas of low employment. There are provisions to minimise what people have to do, but it's not nearly enough. And that's particularly harsh for people who are long-term unemployed, not many training opportunities, and yet the pressure is on too, which leads to the next point, to do these things that feel like pointless hoops. So people were quite clear, talking about their clients, talking about, putting in applications they knew wouldn't go anywhere, but they just needed to do it because employment service providers were so tick a box. Or obviously Workforce Australia is to tick a box. What people want is real support to find work. There's a lack of training opportunities, particularly in 4R areas. So people, not only is there no training, but there's very little childcare when there is training available. The system is not great at responding to family and cultural responsibilities, which again particularly affects First Nations people. But we also heard from community workers helping really vulnerable people, for example, who, they might have a criminal record or, they're leaving school unable to read or write, and yet they're still being pushed through these, funnels that aren't getting them anywhere. Important to us, the siloing of the systems is a major issue. So you've got DEWA, Services Australia, Department of Social Services, and the privatised employment service providers. With lack of communication a problem, it means that decisions aren't transparent, but also people don't know where to go to ask for help to sort things out. Next, the suspension and penalty systems. The suspensions are an enormous number of people get suspension notices, but also way too many people are cut off payments. That tends to impact women who already have vulnerabilities, who aren't coping. There's a case example in there of someone who'd had her job seeker cancelled every few months for 5 years until eventually a community worker identifies the underlying mental health issues. The penalty system hits people who are vulnerable and is getting us nowhere. Couple more things that I want to, just before we end, employment service workers, they lack knowledge, but they also lack the confidence to apply discretions. EJA members contact them and say, can you do this particular thing which is allowed per this policy or legislation? And they'll say, no, we can't, whether it's because they don't know or because they've been told by their employer that that's not something they can do, or sometimes the IT system just doesn't let them do it. There's not a button. The system is failing administrative justice principles in numerous ways. It's not transparent. People don't know how to ask for a review, and they don't know where to go for help. that from our perspective, in terms of how the employment services system fits under social security, is a major issue for us, that the system is operating, or should be operating, lawfully and according to those principles. And the last point just to mention is that around natural disasters and extreme heat. So there are provisions, natural disasters, to suspend mutual obligations, but it's not enough. And people are being forced to use public transport, walk long distances, etc., in extreme heat, pouring rain, etc. The desperation of the government to hang on to mutual obligations when people are struggling with not climate conditions, but like crazy weather, is just unnecessary. Like, it's unclear what they would lose if they could just be more empathetic and slightly more open to suspending mutual obligations when people aren't able to do what's required. Okay, last slide, I think. So we've made recommendations there, of course, around those. Increasing working age payments, parity with pensions, abolishing the current targeted compliance framework, including payment suspensions. People want a system that supports them into work, embedding those admin review principles in, and also a non-punitive approach to employment services. So yes, I do apologise, we've raced through. Do we have time for questions?
Look, people are absolutely welcome to ask questions. We do understand if you have to leave. If you are leaving now, we're very grateful for your attendance. I've circulated the full report in the chat to our right. We'll also forward the copy of this webinar and the report again via email. But if anyone does have any questions, we're more than happy to take them now. Alternatively, there's always a crowd. Asking questions around a crowd is not everyone's cup of tea. You're very welcome to send us an email, which will come as a part of the pack that we send after this webinar.
Email.
But
and we're happy to talk through. I mean, the report covers a lot of what was discussed, but we're happy to talk through issues further as well, if that's useful for anyone.
great.
I have a
Thank
quick
you.
question if you want to take it.
Yep.
Mark Moran.
Hey, Mark.
The catch-22 for youth allowance sounds insane.
Which part?
That if they've left home, they want to get into a youth shelter, but getting into the youth shelter requires information about parental income, and the parental income is too high. They don't live there. But apparently that's a catch-22. It sounds insane. It sounds fixable. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. We say I guess the permanent independence age should be lowered to 18 as a default. There should also be reviewable independence pathways as well. So yeah, reduce the age to 18 as a blanket, as per permanent independence. The parental means threshold should be adjusted to reflect realities, right? So two parents earning $80,000 is you're struggling to pay your mortgage on two incomes of 80 grand, right? Like personally, so yeah.
But I mean, what I understand that catch-22 to mean is that if you're a young person, you're 15, you've left home because you can't stay there, but your parental income determines whether you can get youth allowance or get into shelter. That if that's true, then that's a completely broken system.
Yeah, so there's unreasonable to live at home processes that are different, and you can say, I am experiencing a risk of family breakdown and serious risk of violence at home, and you should be able to access an independent rate of youth allowance if you're 16. But those processes in themselves are not accessible. So people are having to speak to a social worker. The social worker will say, do I have permission to talk to your parents? If you withhold that, that's really difficult for a social worker to make it an unreasonable to live at home determination. So it's fraught and it needs to be amended. Yeah.
And can I just say, coming at it from a different angle, like if you forget what is in the Social Security Act policy, etc., a phone call from a refuge worker saying we have a vulnerable young person here who requires accommodation should be enough to set a process in place to establish that that person is unable to live at home. So yeah, it's something that we will start more detailed discussions with Services Australia about, including brainstorming with them what do they think is, you know, the way to address this, you know, thing that fails the pub test.
It fails the pub test. That's exactly what it does.
Thank you very much, Mark. Fantastic. All right. Final chance. If there's no further questions, then we'll say goodbye, and a great big thank you to everyone for attending and your interest in this really important topic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.